is on that side.
So, yeah.
So thank you, Barbara. So yeah, welcome to this evening's session, which is Facing Difficult Truths with the Climate Psychology Alliance. Jo and Caroline, over to you.
Thanks, Ruth. And thank you for inviting us. We like meeting with you as a group. What we're going to do, Jo and I are going to introduce ourselves very briefly, and then I'm going to lead by talking about a very quick introduction to eco-anxiety and an introduction to the qualitative and quantitative research that I've been doing. And then Jo's going to follow by talking about how to have those conversations with children and about emotional regulation. So that's what we're going to do. Our plan is that we will complete all of that and leave roughly 20 minutes for Q&A. So feel free, the chat's open. We've put some resources in the chat already. So there's the link to the Climate Psychology Alliance website, excuse me, and the websites for Jo McAndrews and myself, Caroline Hickman, they're in the chat already. But please feel free to put questions in the chat or comments in the chat throughout the evening, because we'd like to pick those up. We'd like to make this as much of a conversation as we can. So very quickly, my name's Caroline Hickman. I'm a lecturer at the University of Bath. My research for 10 years now has been how children and young people globally feel about the climate and biodiversity crisis. And this has been with children in the Maldives, Nigeria, across Europe, Brazil, North America, very broad ranging. I've recently been involved in a large scale, the largest to date quantitative study of children and young people globally, which I'll present the data, some of the statistics from in a minute. I'm also a psychotherapist, and increasingly my psychotherapy practice is being filled with couples, with adults, and with young people talking about how they feel in relation to what's going on in the world environmentally, in terms of ecology, and thinking about their own futures. And as Ruth said, I work, as does Jo, with the Climate Psychology Alliance. This is an open access website. We're a group of psychologists, academics, researchers, artists, very broad group who are interested in bringing a psychological understanding to the climate crisis. Go and have a look. There's lots of podcasts, there's lots of information that you're welcome to make use of. Over to you, Jo.
Thanks, Caroline. Hi, everyone. So I also trained as a psychotherapist many years ago, but for the last 15, 20 years, I've really focused on working with groups of people who work with children, either parents or professionals who work with children around the subject of child development and what it is that makes children happy, healthy and resilient. 15 years ago, I got very excited about the research that's coming out of neuroscience and what that tells us about the importance of adults in children's development and well-being. So a few years ago, I like many of us, had a sort of a new level of jolted waking up to the climate crisis, thanks to Extinction Rebellion. And through that, I met Caroline and really have learned a lot from her about the research that she's done. My work now is supporting parents, teachers, educators, other professionals in supporting children in the face of climate crisis. And I have a website which I've put the link to, talking about eco-anxiety and how we make ourselves more climate resilient in a very big way. So thanks, Caroline, over to you.
Sorry, I can't talk and type at the same time.
Oh yeah, sorry, I could just carry on talking while you're typing.
No, that's all right. I was just trying to say, please ask questions in the chat. So
yeah,
if you just joined us, Jo and I have just briefly introduced ourselves, and we're posting a few resources in the chat. I'm going to share my screen.
So Caroline, just to repeat what you said before about this next hour, Caroline's going to be introducing her research and ideas about climate anxiety and climate psychology. And then I'm going to follow up afterwards talking about what can teachers do about this.
Brilliant, thanks, Jo. So I want to frame this first part. So my talk is in two parts. I'm going to start by talking about eco-anxiety more generally, psychologically, and also look at it as a transformational journey in understanding the eco-anxiety and how we can transform that into a form of eco-empathy. To be very clear from the start, we only feel eco-anxiety or distress in relation to environmental problems because we care. And so, although it can be distressing, it can be uncomfortable, it can be disruptive to be feeling this anxiety, actually it's something we could feel proud of because we care. So it's that connection with caring, not just about humanity, not just about children and children's futures, but also the planet that we're inhabiting. That capacity to care brings us close to those uncomfortable feelings. This is absolutely not a mental health problem, although it can trigger mental health problems and it can cause such high levels of distress that it could be seen as a mental health problem, but actually it's an emotionally healthy response to the reality of what's happening in the world. We measure mental health by looking at our capacity to respond to external reality, and the external reality is seriously worrying and getting more so by the week, isn't it? So it's a healthy response. So I want to think of this as a journey through anxiety to empathy, to aliveness, to community, to connection. And Joe and I are both members of the Climate Psychology Alliance, whose strapline is facing difficult truths. Something about the need to stand and sit in relationship with these difficult truths. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about in the second half this evening is uncomfortable and it is difficult. But it's only by facing this, and there's a lot of discussion going on at COP about greenwashing and about the importance of facing these truths, about looking at the reality of what we're trying to deal with as humanity. I feel convinced more now than ever before that unless we do that, we have no chance of resolving these things for ourselves or future generations. But the need to face them is uncomfortable. And that's where the climate psychology comes in with some ways to help navigate that, to build the emotional resilience and build that relationship. And just in case we were at all in doubt, and I'm guessing we won't be as a group, but if we were at all in doubt in terms of thinking about this as a threat to humanity, these things are online. I don't want to offend anybody, I promise you. I'm not taking COVID lightly in the slightest. 18 months on, I'm still dealing with long COVID myself. But when we talk about threat, we talk about the scale of threat of COVID and recession, not making a joke about those. But then we've got climate change, and then we've got the biodiversity crisis. Technically, we probably should be putting COVID into the biodiversity crisis wave. The humanity right now, and I know it's a well-used phrase, but it's worth repeating. We are facing unprecedented, incremental threats, wave after wave after wave. And humanity doesn't really know how to navigate this. And we need to learn. And that's partly what the work of Joe and myself and groups like the Climate Psychology Alliance are really engaged in, is talking about how do we navigate these? How do we stretch ourselves psychologically, socially, educationally to deal with this? I'm always grateful to Gus Speth, who's a scientist, a physical scientist. He said he used to think in top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. And with 30 years good science, we can deal with those. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And science doesn't know how to do that. Now, I happen to think that, I mean, this was written a few years ago, I happen to think that there's less of a harsh delineation nowadays between natural science and social science and psychological science, particularly when looking at issues like the climate and biodiversity crisis, that there's more awareness of the need, the interrelationship between these things, the interconnection of these things. But the interconnection of natural science with social science and with psychological science is essential. At the University of Bath, they have me teaching this material to chemical engineering students because they say they want emotionally intelligent, informed engineering students for the future who can think about these things and think about people as part of the work they're doing as engineers. So these are new paths, new blueprints, and we try to make sense of what we're going through by relating it to previous threats that humanity's faced, like the Cuban Missiles Crisis or nuclear war or a global war. The problem is we could find our way through those things by imagining life on the other side being pretty much the same as it was when we went in to the crisis. And there are also parts of the globe that would have not been affected by the Cuban Missiles Crisis or a world war. We cannot think about the climate and biodiversity crisis that way. The climate biodiversity crisis will leave no part of the planet untouched. Even if some countries are less vulnerable, such as Iceland or New Zealand, there's going to be millions, if not billions, if not trillions of climate migrants and animals suffering. And the impact of that systemically is going to be enormous. So this isn't something that we can afford to deal with in separated ways. But humanity has not faced anything like this before. So we do need to find new ways to navigate this. And of course, we need scientific, political, technical, economic, rational innovation and solutions. Of course we do. But we would be delusional, I think, if we just think those are enough on their own. For one reason, we've had many of these solutions for decades and failed to act. For another reason, human beings need to know how to find their way through this. And the threat of that can cause us to go into a threat response, which I know Jo will talk much more thoughtfully about than I'm doing. The kind of fight, flight, freeze response will trigger that kind of reactivity in us. So what we really need to do is look under the surface of this. And a lot of climate psychology says we are really looking at transformation rather than change. But we have to look at how humans defend against these things, which means we need a framework which includes the unconscious and recognizes we're not completely rational creatures. If we were completely rational creatures, we would not have got into this mess in the first place. So I'm certainly speaking from this lens that says we have to remember that we can often be unconscious creatures. Paul Hoggart, I think, framed this very clearly when he said we're living in a time when a tragedy which is without precedent is unfolding in front of us. We're witnessing these catastrophic rates of species extinction. There's two key words here. It's the living with and witnessing. So we are both living in this and observing it happening at the same time. And that can be really confusing and complex for us to navigate. I don't know about you, but every day, especially at the moment during COP, you read the news, you look at new figures, you look at new facts, and it's relentless. There's more and more and more information coming out all the time, which we need. But it's about how to live with this and be okay within it. I was in a webinar in the Philippines, thanks Zoom, a few weeks ago, and I loved that opening question. They said, is it okay to not be okay at the moment? And we all answered, yes, it's absolutely okay to not be okay. And yet we have to be okay with not being okay. So how are we feeling about this? Well, all of this makes sense. Anxiety, grief, hope and hopelessness, some anger, some blame, frustration, guilt, shame, sadness, grief. It's okay to have fantasies of rescue or apocalyptic fantasies. We just don't want to get stuck in those fantasies of rescue or apocalyptic fantasies. It's okay to recognize that sometimes we can feel defensive or feel despair about this. We just don't want to feel all of these things on the same evening. But often what we find ourselves doing is cycling emotionally through these complex feelings and moving through them over and over again. The key message here from me is we both need external activism. We need to be taking action in the world in multiple ways, but we also need this internal activism, this internal turning within, going down, deepening into these feelings and finding ways to be okay with our hopelessness. We just don't want to get trapped in our hopelessness. So I think I've already said this, that eco-anxiety is an emotionally healthy response. A lot of our anxiety is about whether we will take action in time. So it's that dependency, that attachment, that relationship about it. Everyone I talk to says, actually, yeah, I'm really anxious, but I'd feel okay. If the government was taking action, I would feel okay. If everybody was leaping into action, we were doing everything we possibly could, we would find ways to manage this threat, this trauma, and this anxiety. So it's that relational bit that is really causing a lot of the distress for people. The fact that we are dependent on governments to take action. And that's what's causing a lot of the distress in young people in particular. Now, I also don't want us to think that eco-anxiety is any one particular fixed experience emotionally. Very mild experiences, which I think probably most of us are feeling on and off, can respond to reassurance. There can be a focus on optimism and hope. But then it becomes more severe. And as it becomes more severe, people are less likely to feel reassured. They're less secure in other people's capacity to take action, to be protective. There's less defenses against this. And this is what I'm noticing, particularly in children and young people, that what's happening is it's breaking that relational attachment bond in children and young people. The failure is in people in power, their failure to act. At its most severe end, and this is fewer numbers, but they're still important, so I want to keep them in the frame. These are young people in particular who are really struggling to get respite. There's an anticipation of collapse and an extinction, an absolute loss of belief in others' ability to care. And at its worst, this causes people to feel suicidal, to feel abandoned, to feel betrayed. And there's an absolute loss of personal security. That we can do something about. This is the kind of thing young people are telling me, this profound attachment to the planet and nature, frequently angry, caring about future generations, desperately wanting to listen to each other and be listened to. A lot of empathy and compassion, a lot of awareness that the climate crisis is an issue of global injustice. Children and young people are very tuned into fairness and justice. And in that respect, I think they're embodying this vulnerability for us. And they need adults to tell the truth. They need adults to have courage around this and find ways to have these difficult conversations with them. And these mature defenses can be encouraged and supported, such as altruism, courage, emotional self-regulation, humor, gratitude, mercy, mindfulness. There are lots of positives here. And what this helps us do is face this denial, get under the surface of our feelings, repair our relationship with the natural world, grieve what we've done and lost, talk about needs versus wants. All of these things are ways to navigate this. What this then moves us towards is this eco-understanding, moves us through the anxiety to empathy, compassion, courage, community, awareness. We cannot wish ourselves out of this crisis, but we can find ways to go through it. I use the Michael Rosen, we're all going on a bear hunt story. We meet these obstacles at the moment, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, soulfully. We can't get around them, but we can go through them. Because living fully means facing this anxiety that goes with the territory of being a vulnerable human being. Now, I'm going to very quickly just give you some numbers. So I hope that's made some sense for you. And I hope that's given you a frame. But if you're in any doubt, let me just give you some figures. Let me give you some numbers. So I've been researching this for 10 years. But I'd only really got data from 300-400 children. So we needed more. And so here we have 10,000 children across 10 different countries: Australia, Brazil, Finland, France, India, Nigeria, Philippines, Portugal, UK, US. Now, what I'm going to say before I give you these figures, and you may be familiar with some of them, is I've presented this research multiple times over the last 6 weeks to adults and to children and young people. Adults frequently say to me, this is awful, this is horrific, this is depressing. And then I start to get messages from children and young people, either in the chat or emails online, saying, thank you, I feel better. This gives me hope. I feel relieved because this is how I feel. So just keep that in mind. This is not, as far as I'm concerned, a doom and gloom message. What would be depressing is if we didn't pay attention to what they're telling us. So 8 out of 10 children, young people, this is not that surprising, worry that climate change is threatening people and the planet. Impact on daily life, 45% globally. But in the UK, this is lower because we're not facing the immediate physical impact of climate change so much in the UK yet. So this is still lower, but globally, it's 48%. And this is what it looks like. It's not going to be a surprise to you to see that in the Philippines and India, this is 74%, Nigeria, 66%, Brazil, 50%. You can see the inequality immediately. But let's have a look at how we feel. So we wanted to measure emotional responses. So 67%, this again, children worldwide, 67% said they felt sad and afraid. I'm not going to go through all of these. And at the other end, you've got optimistic, 31%, indifferent. Indifference, I think, here is a real shutdown of emotion. So those are the worldwide figures. Let's see the UK figures. Not that different. Sad and afraid, 63%, 62%. So you've actually got the same shape in this graph. So the children in the UK are feeling very similarly to the children, I know I'm generalizing, but the children across the world, across those different countries, Nigeria is very similar. Then we asked them what they thought. And over half, 55% worldwide, 53% UK, ignore the 42, I should have removed that earlier, think they won't have access to the same opportunities their parents had. Over half, 52% worldwide, this is lower in the UK, 39 UK think their security will be threatened. Over half, 55% worldwide, 47 UK think the things they value will be destroyed. I've put the Philippines figures in here because I want to show you this. 8 out of 10, 83% worldwide, 80% UK, 92% Philippines think that people have failed to take care of the planet. We need to take responsibility for the fact that 92% of young people in the Philippines, they are left feeling that people have failed to take care of the planet. 3/4, 75% worldwide, 73 UK, 92% Philippines think the future is frightening. 4 out of 10, 39 worldwide, 38 UK, hesitant to have children because of climate change. Over half, 56 worldwide, 51 UK, 73 Philippines, think that humanity is doomed. It's not okay, is it? Now, this is worrying. This is even more worrying. This is what Joe is going to be speaking to. 48% of children and young people felt they'd been dismissed or ignored by other people when they tried to talk about climate change, both worldwide and in the UK. That we could do something about tomorrow. This is about children trying to talk about how they feel and feeling dismissed, ignored. We also asked them about governments. We asked them about responsibility of governments. We've got 62% worldwide saying governments cannot be trusted. We've got 65% saying governments are failing young people. 64% governments are lying about the impact of their actions. See what I mean about that broken trust? And this is the UK. 65% in the UK think that governments are failing young people. So young people are saying they feel betrayed, abandoned, anguished, ashamed, ignored. But there is hope. They can feel reassured, protected, valued, and hopeful if we listen to them and if we take these feelings and these thoughts seriously. This is a group of researchers that was involved, 6 different universities, with clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, and academics and psychotherapists from the United States, Canada, Finland, and the UK. And our research was quoted by Antonio Guterres in his opening speech to the United Nations world leaders a few weeks ago. So this is the link we're making with young people and moral injury and climate justice, that our failure to act on this causes a moral injury in children and young people. Again, this we could do something about tomorrow. Thank you. I told you I was the horrible person. I'm going to hand you over to Jo, and hopefully she will help you in terms of thinking what to do with this. Over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, so to start with, I just want to invite us all to take a moment to digest some of that you've just said. Listening again to those figures breaks my heart again, that children are going through such suffering, and that 4 out of 10 children thinking about not having children themselves. And yeah, my teenage daughter has said that to me, that's maybe she shouldn't have children given what she knows. And she doesn't know that much, but with what she does know, that she's already thinking that this is very global and close to home. So I just want to invite everyone just to take a moment to feel how you feel in your body. What are you noticing in your body about the impact of what you've just heard Caroline talk about? And is there something you need to do, some way of moving or fidgeting or stretching to enable yourself to come back to your thinking brain and your ability to listen to some more information on this subject? I'll just give you a moment to feel your feet on the ground, maybe stretch your body and resettle to come back to this brief and intense presentation. Okay, so thank you so much, Caroline, for that extraordinary, deep and global perspective, and the fluency of how much you covered in that time. What I'd like to do is come back into the classroom and think, okay, what do we need to know about teachers and pupils and teaching climate science, and what are the practical things we can do to support and protect the children in our care from the trauma that comes with this suffering, with this anxiety alone. So I'd like to share my screen with you to show you some things. Okay. So in a nutshell, the foundation of what I want to say is about what we know about human beings and human functioning. We have evolved for connection. What I mean by that is that every aspect of our growing and functioning and well-being is about how we are connected to each other. It's about how our relationships with those who care for us, our relationships with people on the other side of the world, and our relationships with nature and our environment. We evolved on the earth in families and in tribes of connected people, and that connection is at the heart of our healthy development. The heart of connection is emotion. How we feel is way more impactful than what we think. It happens earlier in our development, and it is the source of our decision making and our understanding and our making sense of the world. Obviously, climate science evokes big emotions. That should be a very obvious thing to say, and yet I go to many talks and courses about teaching climate on the curriculum in schools, and I rarely hear feelings mentioned. It's all about science, knowledge, and facts. Sometimes it's very creative ways of working with science, knowledge, and facts, and that's delightful to hear, but I am regularly shocked at how the emotional experience of children facing this information is missed out. So I suppose that's the first thing to say is, let's stop missing that out. Let's start seeing psychology and emotional well-being as the heart of climate teaching. And I'm going to say a bit more about why I'm so sure about that. So just to say a little bit about the neurobiology of human development that I've just mentioned. So I've already said that we grow and we function in a relationship. In a way, it's hard to even find the words to say how strong that is. Our brains and bodies are physically built around our earliest relationships, and they continue to grow and develop in our relationships throughout our whole lives. Now, children spend a lot of time at school, and the relationships they have with individual teachers and with the adult population of schools in general, like the atmosphere that adults create, is hugely influential on how children feel safe and loved. So children need warm adult care to learn and develop healthily. Now imagine if that knowledge was at the heart of the education system. Just think about that for the moment. What would it look like if the whole education system was built around that knowledge that children need warm adult care to learn and develop healthily? I think it would look quite different from how it does at the moment, but let's go a bit further. So when I say we're all connected, I don't just mean that in some poetic way. I mean that our bodies, brains, and nervous system literally and physically tune into each other all the time outside of our conscious awareness. You might know this as a teacher, that when you have an off day, when you're not feeling so good yourself, somehow the classroom is more agitated, somehow the children are more restless. I've heard many teachers tell me that they recognize how their mood affects the behavior of the children in the classroom. None of us have individual behavior. Everything we do and think is in the context of our relationships. The relationships that we're in that moment, but also the relationships in our past. Stress is catching, anxiety is catching, safety and warmth are catching. So as teachers, what is it that we bring to the classroom? What is the soundtrack, if you like, or the emotional landscape that we're creating in the classes that we run? I want to say an important thing about the culture of punishment and reward in schools. This is, I believe, a cultural blind spot, and a massive one. It's very normal in pretty much all schools I've ever been to use various systems of behaviour control through stickers, incentives and disincentives, consequences and praise. The reward charts on primary school classroom walls, they are there as if they are as normal and necessary as the roof and the floor. And yet they are one of the things which is destroying children's resilience. And I think making schools a worrying place to be teaching climate science. I'll tell you why that in a minute. So punishing distressed behaviour causes more distress. I'm just going to check. Yeah, sorry. I'm going to come back to this point in a minute because I want to say something more about behaviour. So feelings are at the root of behaviour. Distress and anxiety come out in the way that we behave. They're shown because our nervous system gets activated when we don't feel safe and we don't feel connected. And I think this is an important point. Safety isn't just physical safety. When we don't feel connected to the adults, in case of children, when the adults that are in their presence aren't showing care and warmth, there's a level of distress and anxiety that's created. When the subject matter of the lesson is also distressing, that's amplified. Caroline already referred to our nervous system responses of fight, flight, and freeze. So we have a biological response to distress that puts us into a fight mode where we become hyperactive, aggressive, disruptive, oppositional. We have a flight mode that puts us into escape and hiding and avoiding. and we have a freeze mode that just shuts us down because our body thinks that nothing else is going to work. So there's no choice around this. This is an unconscious biological instinctive response that our brain creates for us in response to not feeling safe. So whenever I ask teachers to think about what is the behavior in their classroom that bothers them the most, it pretty much always can be divided between those three categories. It's fight behavior, it's flight behavior, or it's freeze behavior. And I think this shows very clearly that behavior is not a choice. It's a biological instinctive reaction. So I'm talking about this in this presentation because if we teach climate science well, if children understand what we're talking about, they're going to have big feelings about that. It's going to be impossible to listen to understanding what's happening to the world. As Caroline has already said completely clearly, that there are very big and difficult feelings related to understanding what's going on the earth right now and into our future. Remembering that when children have big feelings, they need caring adults to accompany them. They need warm, friendly, empathic allies in the adults around them. I just want to go back to that slide about punishment. When distressed behavior arrives in the classroom, the traditional way of dealing with it is to send children out or to give them some consequence. The idea is that that's going to make them not do it again. It's completely misunderstanding the heart of behavior. And the reason that I'm talking about it now is I think if we're going to start teaching, it already means we have a vulnerable foundation for children to deal with difficult feelings. Already schools aren't supporting children enough with their anxiety. And with climate anxiety increasing, this is something we need to really, really address. Okay, coming back to children's feelings. So I've just said that teaching climate science is going to bring up feelings if children understand what you're talking about. Of course, they're not just learning about climate and biodiversity crisis from you. They're already learning it from the rest of the world, from their parents, families, from the news. It's everywhere. So how do we help children? How do we create a safe and regulated environment for children to learn about this? We need adults who have warm, attuned empathy, curiosity about emotional response, and authentic friendliness. Sorry, I've just seen the spelling mistake there. But that's supposed to say friendliness. Authentic friendliness. Now, you can't have authentic friendliness when the teacher, any minute, if you don't do what they like, they're going to give you some consequence or punishment for that. They're going to make you sit in a different place or move your name up into the red light or thundercloud or whatever creative and horrible punishment the behavior management board has. For adults to be trustworthy, they need to be authentically open and allies. Now, we can't do that when we don't have support ourselves. Teachers are under huge pressure at school that's been going on for many years. We are also full of climate anxiety. If we understand what's going on, we're also dealing with very big feelings. How can we possibly support the feelings of the children in our class if we don't have support ourselves? So I'm curious to ask you, how do you feel about climate change? How are you feeling about the information that Caroline gave you earlier, or your knowledge of what's going on? And how do you get support for your feelings? This is urgent, that our schools turn into places where adults get support for their feelings, where adults are warmly and authentically supported. You can see that I'm talking about, in some schools, quite a level of paradigm change. The government is not supporting schools to be safe and warm learning environments. So how can the adults turn this around to change the culture for themselves, and how can they then hold that for their pupils? So I wanted to sort of boil all that down to, what can you do if there were 3 things that you could start doing now to make your climate education more psychologically friendly and support eco-anxiety not being so strong and disabling, the three things would be these that I would say, I think, at the moment. One is we need more support for teachers and other school staff so that you feel well held, emotionally supported and able to regulate your own big feelings. The second thing is we need a culture of warm empathy for children, to care about their feelings and the ability to respond when we see distress behaviour. And then lastly, this is the stop one rather than a do it, stop punishing behaviour, stop punishing at all. That's a challenging thing to say. I'm working with teachers, people get often much more upset talking about stopping punishing than they do about talking about the end of the world, because it feels so immediate and so helpless. But I'd really encourage you to explore. There are plenty of alternatives and plenty of people thinking about this. Oop. So yeah, that's it. That's what I want to say. So we have some time that Caroline and I are both really interested in your questions and comments and thoughts. We've got another 15 minutes to have a wider discussion. So you can put questions in the chat and we'll have a look at them, or you can unmute yourself and ask it in the group.
There's a question come in the chat, Jo, which I think is for you,
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is about expanding some of what you've been saying, really. You've been asking lots of questions, and Sarah said she's not sure if your questions are rhetorical. I think.
Are they rhetorical?
Mm.
I think my questions were to ask for reflection, to sort of, not that you need to answer me right now, but the questions that I would invite us to reflect on. Actually, it'd be great to have an example of the sort of question you mean, because I can't remember how many questions I asked. Lots. Thanks, Sarah. Sarah, yeah, please say a bit.
Shall I unmute myself and that?
Yeah,
it's all right. I was typing away and answering some of your questions, and I'm not sure whether they were rhetorical or not, but actually I don't know who's in the office, whether it's Wendy or Barbara or whoever's there, but they said, did I realise that my answers were just going to them and not to the whole thing? So, and I didn't realise that it just keeps bouncing back. But I worry about what's actually happening, because it's not on the curriculum. So some children are doing things about it, some are not. The messages are every night at the moment, sort of like on the TV. So it is a big conversation.
Yeah.
But then partly I worry that I put too much of a positive spin on things. And I worry if I'm doing the right thing by telling them that they can make a big difference if they recycle, if they walk to school, because I want them to feel empowered to be able to do something rather than not, because they're only primary school children, but then they're going to be adults very, very soon.
It's a really good point you're making, Sarah, because, you know, and we're seeing this discussed at COP a lot at the moment, you know, recycling, planting trees, this desire that we have naturally, understandably, for these solutions that are human-sized, right? When I think about glaciers melting, then I don't feel up to the task of dealing with that, but I can make a decision about which milk I buy, right? So we always want to bring things, of course, back to something that is relatable. I think it's about giving young children, even very young children, two responses. Here's what we can do at a personal level. And then here's what we can do at a social level, which could be social in terms of school, or it could be social in terms of community. And then the next step is, and here's what can be done at a national and international level. So that was for and not to. So sorry. I think it's always about going personal, community, national, international. Because to just frame it as personal is inadequate. But to just go to the international can feel overwhelming. So it's both and, rather than either or. But I really would never leave it at just a personal level, because children are going to be left thinking often then that they're personally responsible for saving the planet. I can't tell you the number of people I've said today in therapy sessions to, you are not personally responsible for saving the planet. You can play your part in the drama, in the theatre of this, but just play your role. But if everyone plays their role, then we have a play, then we're all working together. So I use that metaphor even for very, very young children. Jo, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd love to. I would like to add that I think we need to be really careful about making children feel responsible. That don't worry, the world's going to be fine because you're going to recycle things. And I think also it depends what they've said to give you that response. So if a child says, I'm feeling really scared, it's very tempting to say, don't worry, because you can plant some trees. And then what you're then doing is completely dismissing and leaving that child totally on their own with their fear. And then on top of that, you're telling them it's their job to save it all. And I think it is important. We do need to be encouraging, we need to be modeling action and encouraging action. But I would like to see action on a bigger scale than personal. I went to a talk by some young climate activists where somebody said, what do we need to be doing individually about climate change? And they said the best thing you can do as an individual is stop doing things as an individual. So encouraging children to collectively take action. And I would say, just to throw the cat amongst the pigeons, that we need to be encouraging children in questioning and disobedience, not just coming up with more curriculum friendly ways that they can show that they can do a green sustainable thing. So it's a complicated thing. The thing about hope, yes, primary school children, we don't want to say, oh well, it doesn't matter what you do because we're all doomed. Of course we don't want to give that message, but we can share messages of what children are doing around the world that are having an impact on their communities, and we can share exciting projects that people are doing in our town, in our country, in the world.
Yes, and we can show them, some of the court cases, so the 6 children and young people in Portugal who are currently suing 33 European governments for failure to take action on climate change in the European Court of Human Rights, saying that they failed to protect their futures under the Human Rights Act. Now the youngest there, I think she's 8. I would be showing children that court case. It's a crowdfunded court case. And this is what children and young people can achieve on that level, as well as what can our school do differently? What can my family do differently? So I would be saying that. I also want to read you one of the emails I received. So this was after the research was launched publicly. I'm only a single private person studying in Germany, but I feel the urge to thank you and your colleagues for this research. What the study reveals makes me, for the first time ever, feel that I am not alone with the future and climate anxiety that I experience every day. I still don't know what places there are to go in order to learn how to cope better with this anxiety. But this recent study is an incredibly important step for us young people around the world to emotionally connect and even visually realize that no one of us is alone with this huge issue. I profoundly hope that the message of your study reaches politicians around the world, as well as all socio-psychological professions, so they can react to the needs of us young people. So I asked her permission to read her email in various meetings because I thought it was brilliant. It made me cry. And it just said, yeah, So actually showing children and young people that we understand is crucial. And everything that we do beyond that helps.
Not leaving them on their own with those feelings. Caroline, Jane's asked a couple of questions I wonder if you could address. She's saying about the current science curriculum doesn't cover climate change. It would be useful to discuss this, and children will feel more empowered if they can make decisions in their own communities. And she's also asking for recommendations about stories that can be shared.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the current science curriculum doesn't include climate change, but, you know, various groups are working on that and lobbying on that. And I think that we will see movement on that, particularly after this COP. So I think it is more likely to be included in the curriculum in the near future. And I would like to encourage schools to find creative, innovative ways of doing it anyway. So, for example, from the University of Bath, we worked with a primary school locally in Wiltshire, and we ran a 3-month project where we went in, I think it was one day every 2 weeks and for half a day, working with the children, teaching about relationship with whales, WHALES. We talked about the science of whales, the ecology of whales, the habits of whales, the impact of warming seas on whales. But we wrote stories about whales. We got whales to write stories to the children. We got the children to write stories to the whales in the sea. We spray painted organic spray paint chalk on the school playing field, a baby humpback whale. We planted it with crocus bulbs, which grew. We collected all of our data by getting the children to draw whales, and they included themselves in the drawings with the whales. It was an adorable project. This was, you know, the youngest children were 6 and 5 in this project. So we were able to talk to these young children about extinction through that medium of talking about the impact on a particular animal, which meant it wasn't personal in terms of the extinction of humans. I wouldn't talk to young children about extinction of humanity. I think that would be terribly inappropriate. But you can talk about the pressure that animals are under, because children know this. They're online, they're finding out for themselves. In terms of so I think it is going to go in the curriculum, but I think there are ways to weave it into the school life where it crosses over between art and science and theatre. It doesn't have to be just located within one subject area. And I know I'm not the one struggling to fit everything into the school day when I say that, but you know, lots of groups of researchers would happily come in and run these kind of projects. Contact your local university. There's always research students that are going to want to do projects like this, and we'll come in and resource it for you. Stories, oh gosh, it's enormous. There's so many at the moment being developed. Let me come back to you on that. We'll send Ruth some ideas. There's lots of really nice projects online, like Eco-Anxious Stories, that are busy collecting stories from children and young people, and the Ecocide project, and we're collecting them in the Climate Psychology Alliance website. I would be personally setting children the task of saying, go off and find stories. You know, there's the Lorax story, but children would find their own stories talking about climate change. Or I would use the stories that are already in existence that children love, like the bear hunts. So I use this all the time. So I use the Michael Rosen, We're All Going on a Bear Hunt, to talk about climate change with young children. So we're all going on a bear hunt. I'm sure there's no one in this room that doesn't know this story. You know, we're going to have an adventure, and then they have all these problems. Mud. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We're going to have to go through it. So I use this story to talk to children about how to go through feelings about climate change. So what I would be doing is using the stories that children are already familiar with and love, and then looking at them through a climate change lens and saying, how would we read this story differently if we were thinking about climate change? And then you're going to get children excitedly, happily telling you stories. But we'll give Ruth some other ideas in a minute. Anything you want to add, Jo?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'd add that we've been talking about sort of what we teach about climate, but I also just want to add how much power we have in resourcing children's resilience to face what they're facing as they grow up. So being able to face practically what the huge differences they're going to have to face, and to face emotionally and with with healthy functioning. And there's two things I'd really draw on there. One is nature connection. Anytime, anything that you're teaching and sharing that encourages children to love and know about the earth and to spend time in it, spend time with plants, animals, earth, stones, trees. Any projects that you can get involved in that enable children to get their hands in mud or on tree bark and understand more about that is going to boost resilience for the future. And the other thing, as I said before, is emotional warmth. Every time you meet, every time your eyes light up when you see a child, or you say their name, or you express some interest and some care in them, you are physically building their whole nervous system towards resilience for a very challenging, uncertain future. Thank you.
We're running out of time. We've got 2 minutes left, Joe. So, Joe, here you go. Last words from you.
Last words ever.
Last words. No, not ever, honey. Just tonight.
I think what I just said, that's my last words. Nature connection and people connection is the heart of resilience, and our culture is not good at that. Just really wanting to call it out. We don't do it well in schools, and we need to shape up and step up, otherwise we're not serving our children well at all. And you, what would you finish?
Well, my last words would be, you know, Joe and I have been talking about this for a long time and working in this for a long time. And I don't think either of us for 1 second would want to come across as smug or arrogant or over knowledgeable. We know how hard this is, and we know how tough your jobs are in schools, trying to fit in everything that you've got to do. But we also, I think, are communicating increasingly with a sense of urgency, and the immediate urgency, because for me, what drives me is that awareness of that sense of betrayal and abandonment with children and young people when we're not talking with them about this, and that we can change very quickly. And so I would add to that by just saying, bring in the idea of radical hope, which is, you know, the doom and gloom apocalyptic thinking down one end of the spectrum, and the naive hope at the other, which is, you know, it's all hopeless, or, oh, it'll be okay, we'll have carbon capture, the government will save us, we'll plant billions of trees. You know, that's a naive hope. That what sits in the middle of that is radical hope. And radical hope says, well, things aren't really tough, but we're going down fighting. We're going to do everything in our power. Barack Obama in 2015 said, our children in the future will look back at us and say, did you do all that you could have done to avert crisis, or did you avoid doing what needed to be done? And, you know, so it's just about keep doing a little bit more all the time, and pushing schools, pushing your head teachers in your schools to just do that little bit more all the time. And then you can answer those children in the future and say, yeah, we're doing all that we can do. So thank you for joining us tonight. Do you want the last word, Ruth?
Oh, thank you so much. It's always an absolute pleasure to listen to you both, and tonight to see the outcomes of your research that I know has been in motion for so long, and everyone who's attended will have so much food for thought, you know, such rich dialogue. We could stay all evening, but we all have other things we have to do too. So thank you very much. Caroline and Joe and myself are in conversation about creating a longer course aimed at primary practitioners. We're hoping that will be for the end of January. So if you're on our mailing list, then you should hear about that. And yeah, we were hoping to have things pulled together for tonight, but conversation is still continuing. But I cannot thank you both enough. It's an absolute pleasure to see you both this evening, and thank you everybody for coming to this symposium event. There's lots more happening over the next 2 weeks, classroom sessions, evening teacher CPD, so I hope to virtually see you at more events. Thank you everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.